Welcome, I'm Dale Davidson, your host for My Story. Each and every week we bring a brand new story to you, someone who comes to us or we ferret out somewhere, and they have an interesting story, often a story of Christian witness, and often an unusual story. And we have all of that today. We're very pleased to have with us Jeneen Miller, who is the Las Vegas director of the Survivors of Institutional Abuse. She's written a book called Pieces of Victory, and she's here to talk about a tough subject, institutional abuse in children's reformatories across the country. There are some graphic details, so we would recommend that young children not watch, and parents, please be advised of that. Jeneen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we
appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, we appreciate having you on. Tell us a little bit about how you got to Las Vegas to start with.
Oh, the cost of living.
We know about that. Yeah.
And I used to live in Southern California.
Okay.
And real estate is a lot less out here. And
everything's a lot less.
Yes,
yeah, I was in California last week, and I said, now I remember why I live in Las Vegas. It is pricey. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for being in Las Vegas. I had an opportunity several weeks ago to meet with you and some of your friends, and we're going to be interviewing them as well in subsequent programs of My Story. Tell us a little bit about your story. I'll mostly shut up, but I'll ask you a question from time to time. I understand that when you were young, you were, I guess an inmate is probably the right way to put this, at the Victory Christian Academy in Ramona, California, and you had a very tough time inside, didn't you?
I did.
Tell us about that.
I was tricked into going to this facility, and my parents tricked me into it by telling me that they were going to take me to see a psychiatrist, and it was nothing of the sort, and I was locked in there for 8 months. And
Wow.
prior to that, I was a strong Christian, and I went to a Christian school called Cornerstone Christian in Camarillo.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know that.
And I had a 3.5 grade point average. I worked, I studied, I didn't do any drugs, no drinking, and no behavioral problems, and no court order. My parents decided to lock me up in this facility.
Did they ever talk to you about why they did this?
Years later, I asked, why did you send a 3.5 grade point average to, and it was just recent. You know, I went over there because I wanted answers, and I don't really speak to them anymore, but I wanted some answers, and they said, well, we didn't know it was a reform school.
Really?
That was their answer.
What did they think it was?
I don't know if they're afraid that I'm going to try to sue them or what. I don't know, but...
Right. Now, you know, it has a Christian name, you know, Victory Christian Academy. It purports to be a Christian organization, but obviously what goes on inside is far from Christian. Tell us how that plays out.
It was nothing that I've ever seen in chapel before. You know, I went to a born-again Christian church down the street from our house, and I volunteered my time at that church, and I participated in youth groups, so I was very active in the Christian community. And then when I went into this place, it was so horrific what this preacher did to us in chapel on a day-to-day basis. So it was taking the Bible and using it as a tool to lower self-esteem and to make you feel like you were an untouchable, not only to society, but to God.
Tell us what he would do in chapel.
He would separate the sheep from the goats, the sheep being the followers of Christ and the goats non-followers, and he would specifically point out who he thought were followers of Christ and who were not. So separating the sheep from the goats, and it was just such a degrading thing to see him throw these girls into a goat pile. Lucky for me, he chose me to be a sheep and not a goat, but I still felt like a goat.
Sure. Now, in lowering self-esteem, what kind of things would he say and do to bring down your level of self-esteem and that of the other girls?
He would call us liars, thieves, whores, Jezebels, heathens, druggies, alcoholics, home wreckers, anything that he could do, and then back it up with Bible verses.
Now, when did this happen? Was there chapel every day, once a week?
Twice a day.
Twice a day.
Twice a day. So that's brainwashing twice a day.
Mm-hmm. And
Plus,
for how long at a stretch?
I don't know. I think I want to say an hour.
An hour at a time. Yeah. And he used this as an opportunity to control behavior?
Exactly.
Is that what it was? Now, was there physical abuse as well?
There was physical abuse. Making us stay on our bunk beds for 4 hours at a time while other parents were visiting the girls on their time.
Uh-huh.
And if you asked to go to the restroom, you would get a demerit. A demerit is a punishment. So now you're punishing a child for asking permission to go to the bathroom. So most girls would hold in going to the bathroom.
Wow. And were there beatings as well? I know there have been in other reformatories of this type.
I agree. There were beatings at the Hephzibah House and New Bethany and other places.
Mm-hmm.
At this place, what I witnessed, girls being handcuffed and then berated in chapel with the handcuffs because they tried to commit suicide. So he thought the right thing to do is to handcuff them in chapel. Oh, that's going to really,
mm-hmm.
make their self-esteem better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what his logic was.
Now,
anyway.
Was there any education inside? Were there classes of any type?
There were PACE, independent, and then you would put a flag up if you have a question. But if you asked a stupid question, you would get a demerit. It was crazy. I've never experienced anything like this in school before. And it was about a 5th grade level. And I was happy with that because I was so emotionally distraught when I was in there
mm-hmm.
that, I was used to memorizing The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. I didn't want to study.
Yeah, you couldn't focus,
I couldn't
sure.
focus in there.
If you're constantly on edge and wondering what's going to come next, you really can't focus your mind on your work, your relationships, or on the Lord, right?
Exactly.
Now, what kind of impact did this have on your faith?
I have my own personal spirituality,
mm-hmm.
so to me, it's not God's fault that people are like this. So whatever my personal faith is, that's what it is. I lost my faith in the church.
Did you?
Yes.
Let's talk about the academy. Was it for girls only?
Yes.
And how many were in the academy at any given time?
I want to say 50.
Okay. And how many staff members were there?
10 approximately.
Okay, so about a 5-to-1 ratio. Were they all like this?
Yes.
Like this
and
the guy?
I wanted to point out, when you have someone abusing a child and you have another staff that's witnessing this and they do not do anything about it, they're just as guilty.
Well, it's a crime.
It's a crime
not to report it.
It's a crime not to report it. I had a daycare center, and if I witnessed, a parent abusing their child, it's my obligation to report it. Otherwise, my license could be taken away.
That's right.
Which leads me to this: they didn't have a license.
Really?
Yes.
So how did they get away with that?
These types of facilities get away without having a license. For example, in Florida, they're under the FACCCA. In Texas, it's the TACCCA. And if I'm not mistaken, Missouri, MOCCCA.
What does that stand for?
Florida is a Florida Association or Agency, Christian Child Care Association or Agency. I get those confused.
Okay. And there's no state oversight because of that?
There's no state oversight because of that.
What about the health department? What about the fire department? I mean, an unhealthy situation needs to be remedied regardless of who licensed them. Fire safety is irrelevant. What your licensing is. Safety is safety. Why didn't the state look into these places? One of the states, at least.
Eventually, there was enough complaints that, Victor, I'll use the one in Ramona, California as an example.
Okay.
Enough people complained in my head when I was going through this. How come no one has said anything? What is going on?
Sure.
How can this continue to happen? I just thought I was in the twilight zone, and these people were going along with this, and I couldn't believe that no girl has reported child abuse at all. Well, finally, we all, a lot of survivors reported it enough to get attention, and as soon as I got out, I got a hold of everyone I could. Social services. Finally, Rick Peralta from Social Services of San Diego contacted me, did an interview with me, took a deposition and used it in court, but it wasn't just myself, it was other survivors that contributed to this. And then they had sent out someone to raid the place.
Okay, and then were they law enforcement? Were they involved?
I believe so.
Okay. Was anyone arrested?
Nobody was arrested.
I wonder why not.
Yeah.
Why isn't this guy and the other staff members in prison?
I know. I think it's money. And then a part of it is the brainwashing too, because when we get out of there, I'm sure I could have done a lot more than what I did, but I felt like my work was done, and then there wasn't going to be any more schools like this. That was
Let's delve into the psychology. In reading about this on the internet and with a book that you provided me with individual cases, I was struck by the fact that the victims often were ashamed, often seemed to be cowed and humiliated and embarrassed, and more often than not were quiet about it. They wouldn't talk about it. What is it about the psychology of an abused child that would keep an adult, now grown up to be an adult, from speaking of this to the authorities or someone who could get something done?
He would make us feel that we were liars, and he drilled that into our heads so much that would think that no one would believe us. Right. And especially in my case, because my parents didn't believe in me when I reported sexual abuse that was happening in my family, and then I'm locked into this place where I have more people that are validating that same thing. And you're afraid, you're scared. He brainwashed us to think we were going to hell, and I thought I was going to hell for 13 years of my life, actually. Wow.
What kind of a long-term impact do you think this has had, not only on you, but your friends, people who have experienced this in the Survivors of Institutional Abuse organization?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, sleep anxiety, feeling unloved, insecure, trying to fit into society and maybe not feeling that they can at times,
Now, it took you 13 years to come out of that?
No, it took me 13 years to believe that I wasn't going to hell.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
But as far as self-esteem, I went through years of counseling for it, and that helped.
How many would you say of your friends in the survivors group have had any long-term counseling, either religiously or secularly?
I want to say slim.
Really?
But with survivors of institutional abuse, I feel that is probably the most healing, and it is leading into getting counseling and getting help and having us direct them in the right area so they can get some help. Sure. But another survivor had told me, I asked, did you get any counseling for this? And she said, no, I'm connected with other survivors just recently, the past 5 years, and that was the best healing experience possible. So I think that just being in this group with a support system and then meeting with survivors, it just empowers you.
Now, a group went to Washington, is that right? Tell me about that.
It was, again, a very empowering experience for me, and I was able to speak. I had spoke for the first time in front of Capitol Hill on the lawn, and I saw other survivors speaking out, and I don't know, I just felt strong enough to tell my story and to get the message out.
Now, you've had a congressman interested in this issue, is that right?
Yes, in California.
Tell me about him and what he's tried to do for you.
Jody knows more about him than I do,
Okay.
but I believe he is helping us with the bill that we're trying to pass.
Okay, tell me about the bill.
And I believe his name is George Miller.
Right,
but-
I think that's right.
Okay.
I'll ask Jody more about it, but tell me a little bit about the bill and what you're trying to accomplish.
I am trying to use my book as a tool for a couple of things. One, I would like to donate a percentage to survivors of institutional abuse.
Right.
Second, I want to spread awareness that this is not just the only school that's happening, but across our nation, and we need to do something about it. Third, I want to try to pass the bill along with all the other survivors, and it's to prevent child abuse in teen programs, to have some oversight, because there obviously isn't any.
So the bill would provide for federal oversight of these organizations.
It's a federal bill, yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about your book a little bit. I like the cover.
Thank you.
Pieces of Victory. It's going to be released soon, I understand. Tell me about the book, what's in it, and what your plans are with the book.
I want to say in about a year.
Oh, okay. It tells your story, obviously.
It's a little bit of a love story, and then how I ended up in a reform school.
Well, tell me about that. What's the love story part?
I fell in love. I was 16 years old, and again, I was a strong Christian, so he would come to my youth group meetings, and we would go back and forth to church, and we would study together. I know I sound like a goody two-shoes. Anyway.
No, this is nice. This is nice.
And wasn't perfect. So let's get too carried away.
Yeah.
But the point is, I didn't deserve to be in a reform school.
Right, right. And what happened with the boy?
We were separated, and which leads me to more of Victory, what they did to us in Victory. As soon as I got locked in behind the gate, my freedom was shut down. I was closed down from society. I was in another world, and I could not make a phone call. I couldn't call 911. I couldn't write any letters, so I couldn't write him anything. And the writing is so therapeutic, for me to just write or to have some kind of closure. We never had closure.
Oh, that's
we were
sad.
disconnected.
Yeah.
I couldn't call him, get me out of here.
Did you talk with your parents at all when you were in?
For 3 months, they would not let you talk to your parents. So for 3 months, I didn't speak to them. I didn't want to speak to them. Even after 3 months, I didn't want the visit. But there were forced visits, and then you had to write them twice a week, I believe, and they would scrutinize all the mail, incoming and outgoing. And it would only be the very people that put you in that you had to write. You couldn't write anyone else. So I didn't have that freedom.
It's a prison, a concentration camp without due process.
Exactly.
Which is unconstitutional and illegal. That's the part that's astonishing to me, that it continues to go on. And under the color of the church is particularly troubling for me and anyone else who is a follower of Christ, that his name could be used and abused in such a fashion. I mean, it's sickening. It truly is. Did this pastor, I don't want to call him that, did this man, this monster, did he have any formal training, do you know?
I don't think so. I think he just had a high school education. And then the Bible,
yeah,
his doctrine.
Yeah. And did he purport to be a church?
Yes.
That was considered to be a church
It was considered
itself.
Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Okay, and
his church.
And he was tax exempt as such?
That I don't know.
Yeah, and where did the funds come from? The parents?
Parents.
And I understand some of these are supported by other churches, either within or without the denomination. Was that the case with Victory Christian Academy?
I believe so.
Is that
I
right?
believe he was getting money in all kinds of directions.
Now, in reading about this in other schools, other reformatories, other prisons, there was a lot of child labor. Did that go on?
Yes, that did go on. In fact, I worked out in the field many times, and one time we were digging ditches, and we were doing it for an hour, and some girls would stretch their back out because they were, hurting,
Right.
and they just wanted to stretch, all of us would get demerits for one girl stretching their back.
It's crazy. You talk about demerits. What were the result of the demerits? Were there punishments based on the number of demerits you had, or how did that work?
A demerit consisted of, I will not stretch my back up during work time 100 times, 500 times, depending on how severe they thought your crime was.
Write that out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you were punished for leaving your hairbrush out. If you said, "Oh my God," or "Oh my gosh," or "darn," the list could go on. There were so many things that you could not say. You couldn't talk about Madonna or Prince or anything that was in the outside world. Secular music was
Forbidden.
a definite forbidden.
Yeah.
I couldn't talk about the newspaper. I couldn't talk about Edgar Allan Poe. I couldn't talk about anything except for God and the Bible and their doctrine.
And did they have you memorize verses too?
Yes.
And stand up and recite them?
Yes, and if you didn't, you were punished.
If you didn't know the answer?
If you didn't know the verse,
Yeah.
you were punished.
Yeah. Now...
Everything was a punishment.
Yeah. And what kind of punishments would you get? Would you get corporal punishment? Would they beat you?
We would get isolation.
Okay.
I didn't witness anyone getting beat. I witnessed people, girls in isolation, and
They'd lock them in a room?
for weeks at a time, sometimes months.
Oh, God.
And I noticed one in particular who he would constantly call a heathen. That in itself is wrong. And she came out of, they called it the Get Right room. And then when they moved to Florida, it was called the room of grace. Anyway, she came out, her hair was matted. It didn't look like they were giving her a shower. Had bragged that he was giving her baby food. If you want to act like a baby, then we're going to treat you like a baby. I don't know what else she was getting, but I don't think she was eating properly. We were threatened to eat our own vomit. We were force-fed. If you had to eat in a certain time frame, and if you didn't, you would get punished. So you were constantly eating fast, and always afraid that you were going to make a mistake, all the time.
And that was set up so you did make a mistake.
Right.
Right.
So you were a failure, and
Yeah.
it was just drilled into you that you're a failure all the time.
Now, what did your parents say when you returned? We're glad you were there. This was for your own good. What happened to you? I mean, anything?
Knowing what I told you about how they didn't think this was a reform school,
Right.
I confronted my father at the age of 17 when I got out. I got out early at 8 months, but it still was enough damage. I said, "Why did you send me there?" Finally when I was off the remote control. "Why did you send me to that place? That place was, for troubled teens. Why did you send, did you, think I was bad?" And he said, "Yeah, that's exactly why I sent you there, because you were bad." But then 24 years later, they claimed that
They didn't know.
They didn't know where they sent me.
Estrangement from family, is that common among the survivors?
Yes, it is common.
And because of the same thing, because the parents sent them there, or are there other reasons as well?
I want to say that a lot of these parents are radical parents, and it seems like there's a lot of girls with the same story that I have, that they didn't really deserve to be in this place, and their parents just locked them in there because maybe they weren't following their Christian ways, their doctrine.
Their legalistic ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one mess up and we're just going to throw you into this place. The other thing I wanted to mention was let's go back to 17.
Sure.
I tried to tell my father before I left home at 17 what happened to me in this place, and he said, "Do you always make up stories? Do you just believe your own lies?" And I said, "You know what? You don't even deserve to hear what I have to say. I'm gone. I'm out of here." And I left.
That's such a shame. Such a shame. As part of the survivors of institutional abuse, in addition to the bill, what remedies would you like to see happen? First of all, to prevent this from ever happening again. No child deserves this, period, no matter what they've done. And secondarily, what recommendations would you have to try to help the people who have been so badly damaged by this?
I want to see a lot of things, come from my book, raising money for survivors of institutional abuse. I want to see this bill get passed. That would make a big difference. And why are these schools still open? I thought child abuse is illegal. So if you have these people on CNN, let's take the Hepzibah House for example. They were on CNN, I don't know how many times. Anderson Cooper, you can look that up. And why is it that place is still open?
Yeah,
that should be closed down. They are beating girls right now as we speak, and no one is doing anything about it.
Yeah. Well, Jeneen, I'm sorry to say that we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming in. I hope we get a chance to catch up with you, particularly when your book, Pieces of Victory, comes out. I'd very much like to have you come back on the show.
Oh, thank you.
That is Pieces of Victory is the name of the book. Kickstarter, if you go to Kickstarter, you can contribute, right?
Yes, you can.
Okay, that's wonderful.
And that'll help with the project.
Okay, and your email is Jeneen, Jeneen, at
SIA-now.org.
Okay, SIA-now.org. And your telephone number, we have an 800 number, which is great, 888-700-8196. That's 888-700-8196. It's Jeneen Miller, author of Pieces of Victory and the Las Vegas director of Survivors of Institutional Abuse. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. God bless you. God bless everyone watching. Please stick around. There's plenty more on the station coming up, and we're going to have some more on this topic. God bless you, and please walk with Him.